on to the EPA 2021 emissions change with Chris Crowell and Doug Kelley. So I'm now going to replace the spotlight with Doug and Chris. Add to spotlight. There you are. And it is now 11:22 Eastern time. This is a 40-minute event. So the floor is now yours, Doug and Chris. Have fun.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Doug Kelley, and I am the industry rep to the FDSOA board, and I am also the FEMA liaison. So obviously FEMA also plays a very big role in this event. And I am here to introduce Chris Crowell, who is with Cummins Engines, and he has been with that company for 33 years. He spent the better part of the last decade working specifically with emergency vehicles. And Chris has prepared a presentation after Paul. We're going to get very technical, but obviously the EPA has been one of the unseen and maybe not so unseen forces that has changed apparatus design over the last couple of decades. So we're going to talk about some of the changes that have happened this year, as well as some of the upcoming changes. So Chris, let me let you get started. And I'd like to start with a question. What has the EPA changed for 2021?
Hey, good morning, Doug and everyone. And who wants to follow Paul Darley? That's some big shoes to fill. I'm going to share some slides. So if we just get confirmation that we can see those.
Yes, we can see.
Excellent. So let me try to get full screen here.
Looks good.
So yeah, maybe coming in, as you mentioned, Doug, the EPA has been a factor since the Clean Air Act in 1970s, early 1970s. And you can see that most of the focus over this time has been to reduce particulate matter and NOx. So they call these constituent emissions. So basically NOx is what makes the sky yellow in some of the larger cities. PM we look at as basically black smoke or soot. But you can see how we've come down from very high levels to almost near zero at this point. So there's really there really is not a lot of place to go to reduce that further. So most of the efforts now have been focused on greenhouse gas. So for 2021, as you start to get those model year engines, the new emission standards were around greenhouse gas, which is a CO2 reduction, carbon dioxide emissions. Some folks may equate this with global warming. Did someone have a question? Okay. For 2021, a couple of new things happened. The first thing is that refrigerant leakage, so from air conditioning systems, is now part of the greenhouse gas standard. So those refrigerants do contribute a good bit to the overall greenhouse gas as compared to carbon dioxide. A certified engine is required in the standard, so we had to meet more aggressive fuel efficiency targets. And then some small businesses were granted an additional year to meet those new standards. Fortunately, through the work of FEMA, emergency vehicles can certify using a simplified GEM model. So that's the government emissions model. And there's multiple inputs to that. There's also a simplified version for emergency vehicles that says we can just use lower rolling resistance tires and certify our refrigerant systems to lower leakage standards. So FEMA is going to continue to work with these regulatory agencies, and you'll hear about that a little bit more later. So I mentioned the GEM model. So if you're an over-the-road truck person, you have to worry about all these things. You have to submit for each classification of model. You have to consider axle ratios, transmissions, lots of features like neutral idle, stop start, and even things like limiting the weight, sometimes even automatic engine shutdown. So for some of you that work on a wide variety of vehicles, you may see some of this going on with over-the-road trucks or pickup and delivery, Class 8 types of trucks. But for fire apparatus, we really only have to worry about this tire rolling resistance and then the certified engine and the refrigerant system. So it looks like we have a poll question up here. So
tell us then, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you have on the screen, and obviously you work for Cummins. So tell us how Cummins is achieving all this.
Yeah, it's a good question. Doug. So for 2021, as I mentioned, there's some vehicle level things, but we also have to have a certified engine. So greenhouse gases, primarily these carbon dioxide emissions, we improve those by reducing the fuel consumption. And the good news is that we are able to meet EPA 2021 without adding new technologies like additional SCR systems or new types of fuel injection equipment. So basically it's optimizing our combustion process and our after treatment process. We were able to meet that. So what we said is, look, customers don't buy vehicles just for the purpose of meeting emissions. So we've got to look at continuously improving our products. So most of our work was around improving reliability. Okay, so there are a number of components that changed on each one of the engine models, and I can take you through a few of those changes. We also worked on improving performance. So as I mentioned, the over-the-road trucks, they have a lot of factors to meet their GEM model standards. So we've done things like lower the peak torque speed. So now we have torque over a wider operating range, so people aren't downshifting as much. Good news for us is that helps our trucks hold speed on grade, and we do see some performance benefits in front of the Allison transmission. We also looked at reducing maintenance costs. So how do we add additional value and increase uptime of the fleet? So I've got a couple of slides on that as well. And the good news for OEMs is we tried to simplify the OEM integration so we don't have major changes to wiring, which leads to more complicated and new training on diagnostics. So we were able to do that with some pretty simple OEM integration steps. Sorry, my slides froze. So I'll just maybe preface things a little bit to say, okay, 2021, there was a significant year. There's some other things coming up. So if we look at this for phase 2 greenhouse gas, there's an additional step 2 that happens in 2024 and an additional step in 2027 for EPA states. There are a number of states that follow California. So for example, in 2022, we now have to cover more of the engine components for a longer period of time, more miles, and out to a longer emissions useful life starting in 2022. So you will see a difference. We'll have 2 different products. We'll have a California product, which will be for California and Pennsylvania, and then the 48 state version will be the EPA. Then when we get to 2024, this is significant. So California has lowered their NOx standard further. So this is going to be a technology driver, and we're still working out the details of how we're going to meet that standard. And then when we get to 2027, we hope that California and the EPA begin to align on their standards so we don't have to have 2 separate products. The good news is for California, if we have any folks on the call from California, for California, emergency vehicles are exempt from these new standards. We still think that there will be some departments that say, hey, I want the quote unquote greener engines. So we'll have some options for those. But the good news is that California is exempt.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
Can you kind of talk about the timing of the standards? So when you say they go into effect like in 2024, what does that mean for the purchaser or the user?
Okay, good. Yeah, great question, Doug. So it gets pretty confusing, right? So like today, you can probably go to a dealer lot and buy a model year 2022 pickup, for example. Okay, that's just a marketing model year. That's not what the regulators look at. from an engine perspective, it's the date of manufacture of the engine. So for us, when we say a standard goes into effect on the engine, January 1, that means we can't build with that with the older components after January 2021. In this case, vehicle manufacturers also certify for greenhouse gas by the chassis build date. So most of them were granted through March of 2021 to continue to use last year's product. So Doug, does that get to your question?
Yeah, I think it does. So then the takeaway for the audience, what I hear you saying is that roughly, if the EPA continues, for any truck that's built after March of this year, or I think there was an extension up to June, is going to have the 2021 engine, and then probably the same thing's going to happen in future emission year changes. So when you say 2024, it's going to be any truck built roughly mid-year of 2024 will have to meet those standards, correct?
Right, and so I think March, many OEMs, so that we let the vehicle OEM make their determination in the regulation, but many of the OEMs interpreted that they had to finish by March, but the EPA did grant some extension to that for a limited number of vehicles out to June. But yeah. So you would potentially still see model year 2020 engines coming in vehicles through the middle of the year of that regulation.
So Chris, we have a couple of questions coming in. I know that you may answer them later on in the presentation, but one is, okay, Cummins is one manufacturer, and in the fire industry, we've gone from 5 or 6 major engine manufacturers down to essentially 2 or 3 now. Are other engine manufacturers taking similar approaches to Cummins, or can you speak to that?
So I don't have the details of each one of those other manufacturers, but I do know that the engines have to meet this tighter carbon dioxide emission standard. They will also have to follow the increased warranty in California-based emission states for the 2022 warranty extension. But largely, some of these other competitors, we actually supply the turbos and after treatment systems for today. So I think the nice part for emergency vehicles is they're part of a group called custom chassis. And those custom chassis provisions allowed most emergency vehicles just to get there with the tires and the air conditioning system.
So, and I know you have this in slides coming up, and I don't want to step on you. How did Cummins meet this? Let's get to brass tacks. What does this mean for the user of the vehicle? What will they see different on your engines for the 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, so I'm going to jump through a few slides here. So hope no one gets dizzy from this, but I'll just kind of try to hit some of the high points, and then I've got some other background slides in between. So the big way we met this is through improved fuel economy. So here's an example on a 12-liter engine platform. Some of the things that we've done over time to continue to increase the fuel economy. And that basically is what lets us allow these CO2 standards. Mostly combustion system optimization, some things with calibrations, and then there are some base engine improvements, whether it's reducing friction between components in the engine or it's reducing air handling losses. So that's maybe the answer to the first part. So the second part, I'm just going to answer this poll question so I can see my slides here. So the second part of your question, Doug, was around what we did. So we did for the L9. So this is probably about 70% of what goes into the fire service. We're able to meet those new emission standards without the need for new technology. That's a big deal for us, right? That's less training. That's greater history of reliability. We did increase the torque over a wider operating range, and then these lowered costs with maintenance intervals. So as an example, when we talk about this performance, you can see now this is a torque curve. So if you look at over here on this torque curve on the right of your screen, okay, the black curve was the older curve. The red curve is the newer curve. So you can see now we carry peak torque from like 1800 RPM all the way back here to about 1050. Okay, so that's again able to hold greater speed or hold speed on grade. And then same thing for the 400, same thing for the 380. The other thing I'll point out is that Allison transmissions like area under this curve. Okay, so the higher this horsepower curve is, the greater acceleration. So we should see some improved performance for most of our pumpers and lighter aerials. If we look at some of the things, let's skip this one for now and talk about maintenance changes. So one thing we've tried to do is we eliminated that coalescing breather element on the top of the engine. So now that is a maintenance-free impactor breather. So basically we're using plastics inside of there that impact the oil and then allow it to drain back to the pan. So that oil coming out of the breather tube is actually counted against us for particulate matter emissions. And these breathers were kind of a sore spot with some customers that you had to change these in some cases every oil change, in other cases every 3 to 4 years, but that is now maintenance free. We also did a lot of testing to see how we can increase our oil and filter change intervals. So you'll see miles on here, but this is not what we typically use in a fire apparatus to determine the maintenance. It's either time, if I'm a low usage department, or it's hours. So the 18 months, 1,500 hours is basically a 50% increase in time and almost double the number of hours. And we did that basically through product validation. We don't want to force people to bring an apparatus in just to change one type of filter. So we've also done testing to extend those fuel filter change intervals out to this 18 months or 1,500 hours. Valve lash adjustments also were increased in terms of the number of hours. And then there's also a DPF or diesel particulate filter cleaning interval at 6,000 hours. So quite a few hours before we get to that point. And then inside the DEF tank and also within the pump, there are filters that strain out any impurities from the DEF. When you go to fill it, if things end up in there or you leave the cap off and we get some crystals forming in there, those filters will protect those other components, and those are 6,500. So I think you can see that we've done some significant improvements in terms of the engine maintenance. I will point out to people, please don't forget this coolant testing and change intervals. So some departments have gone to these organic additive technology coolants or OAT coolants. Those still do have a change interval. In many cases, manufacturers are recommending about 5 years, but please check with your OEM with that. We don't always know the coolant that the vehicle manufacturer is putting in. There are other conventional coolants that require testing every 6 months and the addition of chemicals to protect things like the engine from liner pitting. So these are two of the most common maintenance mistakes that I see, is that we're not maintaining that cooling system. And then the second one is air filter replacement. So there are different intervals for the different vehicle manufacturers. Please take a look at your manual on that. I can jump forward here to X12. We also did some things around maintenance intervals with it. So our oil drain on that engine also goes out to 18 months or 1,500 hours. Fuel filter, similar time and mileage. The DPF, though, in this case, has a lot longer ash maintenance period, basically because it's a bigger canister. You'll also see that we have different oil change intervals on the basis of miles per gallon. So if you're taking care of over-the-road trucks or pickup and delivery within your fleet, you might see that these mileages differ, right? So the better the fuel economy, the less frequently you change your oil. So hopefully, Doug, that helps with both of those questions, both the maintenance and how did we get there?
So if you don't mind, Chris, can you go back a couple of slides, the one that you skipped over a little bit?
Okay.
So, nope, forward, a couple more there. So does this kind of summarize what changed with regards to the actual construction on the engine?
Yeah, this is a good summary. So you'll see that we've got these different icons at the top. So each one of these changes and what it addressed or what it benefits. So fuel efficiency, we lowered these peak torque speeds. That helps us in a lot of duty cycles. We changed piston rings, so we've got improved coatings with lower friction. We increased the compression ratio. We also did some things around camshaft valve timing, which is part of those pumping losses of moving air through the engine. And we reduced water pump speeds without impacting the cooling system sizing. When we moved to maintenance, right, we talked a little bit about maintenance before, but again, the maintenance free breather system, that now all of our engines going forward will have this maintenance free breather system. The X15, that some of you would recognize that more in heavy rescue or aerials, 605 horsepower. Those actually changed over in 2016. We increased the filter capacities and the filter media, which allowed us to get to those longer change intervals. And we increased the size of the oil pan, right? So now we're up in some cases as much as 32 quarts for an oil change. Then there's some regulatory things we have to do. We've already talked a little about that. But in terms of reliability, this is something else we try to do. So we listen. When people call, we listen. We do warranty analysis. We talk with vehicle manufacturers. And so there have been a number of things that we've done to improve reliability. So there's improved sealing down on the oil pan rail and the gasket. We've added a coolant vent to the turbocharger to help keep that turbo cooler and get it to last longer. And we've also done some design changes with the EGR valve. Others may have also experienced things like maybe some seals or gaskets that have leaked. We've gone to higher temperature silicon material in those gaskets to reduce the number of oil leaks. So just a number of reliability improvements on the L engine.
So Chris, there's a lot of questions coming in that come in on reliability. Just at a high level, it's talking about a number of issues with the head gaskets and the leakage. So it sounds like under the new engines, you're addressing some of that stuff. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, sir. In fact, the new gasket went into production in 2019. So all of the service parts that you would get today for any head gasket oil leak would have that improved silicon grommet material. So that should, my phone basically slowed way down once we went to that new head gasket. So we feel very confident that that's going to get us to where we need to be.
Okay. And is that retrofittable?
Yes. So all the service parts, when you go to order, we basically obsoleted the older version gasket. So when you order a new head gasket or an upper gasket set, that's going to come with the new head gasket.
Okay. So from what I'm hearing you say, if I listen correctly, the changes for 2021 are primarily very little in the actual engine construction, quite a bit in the engine management. Were there any changes to the exhaust system?
Yeah, so so I've got a slide on that. Sorry again to jump around here a bit. So we're currently using the same single module after treatment. So there may be some dimensional changes. Maybe it got a little bit shorter in the SCR section and a little longer in the DOC section. But the overall package size is basically the same. For our X12 engine, that's the new one that came out in 2018. There's a new dual vane mixer. So we get even better control of emissions. We've improved the Delta P sensor. So that's the differential pressure sensor that detects the plugging within the diesel particulate filter. We've also updated our dosing system to, they call it a UL2 dosing system. So that doser is actually cooled with DEF fluid. So there were some OEM integration pieces there. But that dosing system is improved. And then we've also obviously improved the software and how we manage things. So we should see fewer regens, better management of that after treatment system.
And I think, Chris, that's probably worth mentioning on that single module assembly that replaces what has been for the last few years, the two canister system?
Right. So starting in 2017, we moved to this new single module, and it's just a lot easier to package. In most of the applications, the folks on the phone will see this sensor table is actually remote mounted, and that's just more from a packaging perspective. But yeah, it's a lot better. It's almost half the size of what our old switchback two-can system was.
Okay, there are a lot of questions coming in from the audience. Let me see if I can hit most of them. If you were recommending an engine model to a larger, or this is from John Witt, if you were recommending an engine model to a larger urban fire department that has used the ISL previously, would you recommend the X12 now?
So I think it depends. I think both are good engines. There's some benefits to both. So if I were a higher GVW, so if I had a higher vehicle weight, I'd probably be tending more toward the X12. Kind of an old rule of thumb that I've gotten from a few spec writers is if it's a single axle L9, if it's a tandem axle X12, I'd say it's a decent rule of thumb. There's other factors too, like, and we actually had a speccing presentation a couple of years ago at an FDSOA. So if you've got like a lot of hills, steep grades, et cetera, and a heavier vehicle, obviously you want to opt up probably to the X12. But if you're traditionally flat around town, that type of thing, Mr. Witt's question specifically, like a large urban department, the L9 should do a fine job.
So there are a couple of questions, and I just want to say for the audience that we will have a presentation later on today about clean cabs and some of the stuff that will touch on emissions. But what's your feeling with regards to cleaner exhaust systems and exhaust removals from the stations? Because I understand that that's really not something that Cummins has a position on, correct? Because even though the air is cleaner, it's still not clean, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of conflicting information out there on that topic. I'll point people to a Health Effects Institute study that was actually done on newer technology diesel engines, where they said that it did not contribute to or any type of carcinogenic behavior, like tissue samples, that kind of thing. So it was a pretty exhaustive study. You can probably find that by just Googling Health Effects Institute diesel study. So that's one thing. I will say this, that FEMA does have I think we call them buyer's guide. So if you go to FEMA.org, there's actually a buyer's guide relative to the exhaust emissions and some of the approaches you can take. Obviously, there's things like you can just build ventilation systems into the station house, for example, so that you're moving the air through the house. The second thing is there are evacuation systems where when you're running the engine in the building, it's actually extracting the exhaust. And then there's other options where you can retrofit components to vehicles. So that's a vehicle by vehicle approach. But I'll say that today's diesel engines are tremendously cleaner, as you saw in those earlier slides, than engines in the past.
There's a question about electric propulsion systems. I know that we're getting a little bit off topic here, but is Cummins working on anything that they can share with regards to maybe that subject?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and we've invested heavily in whether it's battery electric vehicles, hybrids, hydrogen fuel cells. We're doing all kinds of work in that space. So right now, there's just so many different applications that are looking at that we're looking at each one. And basically the drivers of that are what's regulated, what do you have to do? So we have to take care of those folks first. So you'll see a lot of transit bus activity, some school bus activity, because again, higher volume and things that they have to meet. We're also looking at other things like refuse trucks that operate within the city. that run hours and hours every day. It may be a while before we actually see electrification in the fire service, but I think at some point it will come.
Okay. Brian Brown, and I knew he would catch this question. He noticed that on one of your slides that you're using the 1030W motor oil for the new engines and not the 1540. Can you talk about why?
Yeah, so especially for over-the-road truck, okay, where all these things factor into their GEM model, the lower viscosity oils for a steady state, over the road, running 70 miles an hour, 8 to 16 hours a day, right? Team drivers, maybe even more. That becomes very important in those. We still allow 15W40 for the, and in fact recommend for the fire service, just because of the duty cycle and the severe duty nature of those, that 1540 is still fine. The 10W30 reference was, again, for the over-the-road fleets that helped us achieve even better fuel economy. So you will see in our manuals that it'll recommend 10W30, but 15W40 is perfectly acceptable. Good question, Brian. So did we see any other questions in there, Doug, or do we want to cover a couple other topics?
Doug, you're on mute.
Chris, yeah, there are definitely more questions. Has the DEF header changed, been improved for 2021?
Okay, good question. So the DEF system is required for the engine to meet the emission standard, but because of all the variations in vehicle design, we call that DEF tank and DEF header a delegated assembly component. So basically we give specs to the vehicle manufacturer, and then they work with the suppliers to come up with the tanks, the DEF headers, the sensors, the wiring, et cetera. So I know there's been a lot of work between chassis manufacturers and the DEF tank and header suppliers. So probably best to reach out to your specific vehicle OEM to see what things they're doing. I know there have been a number of improvements over the last couple of years to continue to try to make that more reliable. We're also looking at other things we can do diagnostically to help that along. So we've got a project spun up to help the chassis OEMs have better reliability of that component.
So Chris, there's a question about the rings. Will the new rings prevent early wear issues causing premature rebuilds?
Yeah, so not super familiar with the background on that. So obviously we can get into premature rebuilds for a number of reasons, right? Whether it's, are we not maybe using the right oil? Did we ingest some dirt? But yeah, the new rings are a lower friction design. So that's primarily around helping fuel economy, but we should see equivalent to better durability on those rings.
Okay. Can you provide, I'm not sure the details on this, but the question is, can you provide details on the Cummins Westport L9N natural gas conversion?
Yeah, so I'll be honest, we don't use those in the fire service, and there's a number of reasons why, including the amount of volume it would take for fuel storage for equivalent range, just the economies. But there are people, I'm sure, that are working on buses, et cetera. I'll say that on the L9N, and so that is something that we work with jointly with Cummins Westport. You can go to QuickServe online, and if I can just jump forward just to show you, this QuickServe online is our online parts and service information system. So this is maybe a good nugget to take home. You can get access to a free subscription of this if you don't already have it. It will allow you to have up to 5 engine serial numbers per email. So if you pick representative vehicles from your fleet, then you can get access to that parts and service content. There's also a fleet version of this. So if you've got just a wide variety of vehicles where you can look at everything, there's a cost associated with that. But this has everything. This system will give you the owner's manuals, all the manuals, the service manual, wiring diagrams. It points to our parts catalog, the data plate information. It's got fault code overviews and troubleshooting trees, information on campaigns and service bulletins. So this is a really helpful tool. If you weren't aware of that, basically go, and it looks like I forgot to put the website on here. That is quickserve.cummins.com. Quickserve spelled just like this, quickserve.cummins.com. And you'll just sign up for the free account.
So Chris, is there anything else on the EPA changes that you didn't get a chance to cover that you wanted to cover?
I'll just touch on a couple of things. So one thing I'll mention, this is a tool that was released recently within the last couple of years. It's called Cummins Guidance. So you can download this app to your phone, and there's a data link adapter that's pretty small. Maybe some people say about the size of a pack of cigarettes, if we still use those references, but a pretty small data link adapter. And what this will allow you to do is if you get a check engine light, you can plug in and read that code from the truck. It gives it to you in English, not like SAE standard language. And then you can email that to your favorite service provider. So there's a little share button on the screen. So basically extracts all the fault code information. It drops it in your email, and you can email that to whoever your favorite service provider is. The other good thing about this is it can go from truck to truck. So it's not dedicated to one truck. Some departments actually have one of these in their station house. So if they get a check engine light, they can throw the thing in there, have them send it back to the maintenance department. And so they come prepared. So it might be something as simple as low coolant level, or it might be something more involved. And then that would let you make a game plan for that. So pretty handy little tool. Just to cover a couple of other things. If you go out, we've created new literature for all of our 2021 engines. So, and this video is being recorded. So you'll be able to get to these bulletin numbers, and these are available to download. There's also something that summarizes the key changes. So if you've got to take something back and share a shorter version, not watch the whole video, you can get this what's new for 2021 emergency vehicle engines. And that'll just give you a pretty short summary. Just take a look at the time. We're about out of time. The other thing I'll mention is on our X15. So that's the big one, typically in aerials or heavy rescues. For 2020, all the performance parts, all the internal hardware was the same. So all it took was a calibration, as long as the vehicle cooling system could handle it. And you could go from a 505 to a 605. It's a little more important now because we now have 3 hardware families. Okay, so if you have a 500, there's quite a few parts to change to this 565 or 605. And even to change from the 565 horsepower to 605 is quite a few parts. And I think, Doug, that's gotten through most of it. The only other thing I'd mention is we used to have a 350 horsepower rating at 1,000 RP or 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. Now that's a 360 1150, so another performance thing. That'd be more for our commercial trucks with like the Freightliners or Navistars, et cetera.
So Chris, thank you very much. Thank you for answering the questions. Thank you for sharing the information. And it sounds like the changes for 21, though they're somewhat significant, they're not going to change the hardware. And that the next time we need to worry about this is going to be with card changes in 2024. So,
yep.
So.
Yeah, that's right. That'll be a whole new world. So I do greatly appreciate everyone spending time sharpening the saw and learning more about the products. Some great presentations. I've watched them, and hopefully this met everyone's expectations.
Thank you, Chris, so much. Great job.
Thank you.